All right. So welcome to our very first virtual outreach meeting. And just wanted to let people know this webinar is being recorded. It will be made available to attendees at a later date. We may also look into having it available for those that were unable to participate today, but that hasn't been finalized yet. I think we have a couple other questions to review for that. Just a couple housekeeping items to get us started. For those of you who joined early, you've heard me say this already, but wanted to let everybody know who's here that non-presenters are all muted. All of the attendees have been muted. Presenters will be speaking at their particular slides, but they'll be self-muting most likely the rest of the time. This will help eliminate any distracting background noises you may hear. So we hope to also transition webcams so that you'll be seeing presenters as they're speaking, but this is kind of new to us as well. So if that doesn't happen, we apologize and bear with us as we work with the new platform here. Not seeing us is maybe a good thing for some of you. I mean, I made sure I'm wearing my hair down so you see less gray. So I'm sure seeing us is the best, but we're here and happy that you could join us. So next, I'd just like to ask that anyone who has something else that they need to attend to during the conference, please don't place the call on hold. We have been advised that this actually causes disruption to the presentation for everybody else. So if you need to take a second call that is actually on your phone and you're using the phone to connect with us, maybe you need to drop us off and rejoin once you're done with that call. Again, the presentation will be recorded and sent out to all of the attendees, so you'll be able to catch up on whatever you missed at that point. Next, I wanted to let you know we are going to be having this webinar as interactive as we can. Even though you're all muted, we're going to be launching polls throughout the presentation that we're going to require you to submit answers to. If you joined us with something other than Google Chrome, you may have some trouble responding to the polls. We've been told that Google Chrome is the best platform for this go-to-training sort of app, but if you can give it a shot, then great. Also, with the submission of polls, we have been told that the submit button doesn't always work if one of the presenters is speaking. So when that happens, when we're doing the polls, we're going to try and keep the comments to a minimum during that time. And lastly, I just wanted to show some people, especially those people that maybe haven't used GoToTraining before and maybe the screen is foreign to them, how you can actually send us comments and questions. So there's a chat function, and it is, a little speech bubble or the word chat or whatever you have on your screen. You should have a control panel somewhere on the right side of your screen, and within those controls, you should have a chat function. So if you click on the chat, and then you should get your box to type in your message, and then you can click send. And what we do ask is that you leave it on all entire audience for that drop-down box, because that will make sure that the correct people are able to see what you're sending in. Zelfa is helping us out from OST training, and she's actually going to be providing us those comments and questions later on and potentially during the presentation, depending on what they are. And we're going to respond to most of these new comments and questions during the Q&A session at the end. So one other item I wanted to note is if you are looking for this control panel, you can't find it, you may have collapsed it if you're using a certain version. So if you look for that little orange arrow or orange and white arrow, or maybe if you just have the icons and you can't see the text box to use the chat function, click on one of the icons or click on the little arrow to get those functions back. Also, if you happen to put us into full screen mode, you may need to press escape to get any of those icons back in case you don't see them on your screen. I think that was everything I wanted to mention. So I'm going to turn it over to Alex for agenda and intros.
Thanks, Karen. I'm sorry, are you moving the slides forward? I haven't been able to see the slides actually moving off of the first slide.
Let me see. On my screen, it has been moving forward. Let me try again.
Here you go.
All right, just so people can see what I was talking about when I was talking about the chat function. leave that screen there for a second.
Yep.
So people can see, and then we can move on. Great. Sorry about that, guys. Technical difficulties.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Karen. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. As Karen noted, this is a bit of a new environment for us to operate in. I guess first and foremost, want to make sure and hope everybody is healthy and safe as we try to operate through this new quarantine and pandemic environment. We're certainly doing our best here to make sure that we're communicating out some of the past things that we talk through in our quarterly outreach meetings, as well as address some topics that we feel are pertinent to the environment that we're all working through right now. We have a pretty action-packed agenda today. We have a lot of ground to cover. The first 90 minutes or so, we're going to be working through content that we've put together. The last 30 minutes will be left for Q&A, so we certainly recommend that you use that chat function during that time frame, and hopefully we can address most of the questions that were logged throughout this session. The first part of the presentation, we're actually going to work through some follow-up questions and answers that were the result of the last couple OVM quarterly outreach meetings. We're going to touch on vehicle service and cleaning. Again, we think that's a pretty pertinent topic right now. The Green Fleet Committee, Department of Energy Resources, Department of Environmental Protection will walk through some pretty interesting stuff around electric vehicles, as well as some EVIP funding and money available to agencies for purchasing battery electric vehicles. And then we'll kick it over to telematics to provide a bit of a telematics overview and some additional information in regards to a program that we look forward to launching at some point in the near future. All right. And the Office of Vehicle Management has seen a few changes that we'd like to note. I'm happy to say that John Martin has fully moved into his position as telematics data analyst on the Office of Vehicle Management team. In addition, Ryan Labby has joined the team, came on board towards the end of February. Ryan is actually taking over business specialist responsibilities from John. So Ryan will be handling all registrations, plate questions, registration questions, and he'll also be assisting Ted Bunnell with the surplus property program. So this slide is a pretty consistent slide from what we've had in previous quarterly sessions. Basically, this is the statewide contract overview for vehicle and equipment acquisition, parts, maintenance, rental, fuel, supplies, equipment rental. So these are the applicable statewide contract numbers, in addition to the OSD sourcing representatives that manage these particular statewide contracts. And again, this slide is pretty consistent with previous quarterly sessions. So this is our Green Fleet Committee. We meet on a monthly basis to discuss different initiatives that are ongoing in the fleet industry related to alternative fuel and battery electric vehicles. This team is made up of members from the Operational Services Division, Department of Energy Resources, Department of Environmental Protection, and we also have agency representation from the Department of Youth Services. All right. So now we're going to dive into some of the previous questions that have been asked of OSD and OVM in previous quarterly sessions. So some of these questions are going to get sent over to the individual subject matter experts that actually handle them. So in this first question here, can the WEX fuel card process change to have the cards delivered to Westboro when new vehicles are delivered? So I'm actually going to toss this over to my colleague, Cheryl Cushman, to provide some insight and answers.
Thanks, Alex. This was a great question that one of the agencies came up with at a previous quarterly meeting that we had, and it was a great idea. if we can get the gas card in the driver's hand when the vehicle is picked up in Westboro, that's good. So we have a process in place right now. When the vehicles get delivered to Westboro, Tim Morrissey out at the vehicle lot notifies us. We order a gas card, it gets shipped out to Tim. And so when your agency is notified to pick up the vehicle, the gas card is there with it with the keys. So this is a great new process that's going to help shorten the cycle time for getting gas cards in your driver's hands. Unfortunately, we're not able to do this for vehicles that are delivered directly to your agency. So this is a good time to consider, if you're not already using the OVM vehicle lot for your heavy duty vehicles to have them delivered. We want to have you consider it. But keep the good questions coming. Alex, back to you.
All right, thanks, Cheryl. Appreciate it. So next question. CNG units were not embraced by drivers. Is there an opportunity to turn in these underutilized vehicles for battery electric vehicles? The short answer is yes. The longer answer is we definitely recommend and encourage all agencies to really look at, review, and understand their utilization patterns with their fleet vehicles. In terms of underutilized vehicles, if there's an opportunity to right size the fleet, we think that's the right approach to take. Other than that, in the event that there's an applicable vehicle, an admin type vehicle that could be decommissioned and replaced with a battery electric vehicle, and the infrastructure and again the applicability is there, we would definitely recommend that agencies look at that and go that route. All right, can the VEH 84A internal process change to distribute subrogated insurance claims money directly to agencies? And I'm going to turn that one over to my colleague, Vincent McCosey.
Thanks, Alex. So the current process does direct accident subrogation funds back to the agency in the form of a reimbursement in the event of an expenditure. So for example, a non-preventable rear end collision, the agency may pay out $2,500 to repair this vehicle. The vehicle is returned to service after repairs. Fleet responsible subrogate on behalf of the Commonwealth. Funds are collected and they are returned to the agency in the form of a credit on the fleet response monthly invoice. The only time that that process deviates slightly is in the event of a subrogatable total loss. In the event of a subrogatable total loss, funds are directed back to OVM and are eventually directed to the general fund for future redistribution. OVM is reviewing this portion of the process to determine if a change may be made and whether it can be incorporated in the terms of this current contract VEH 84A or its future replacement contract. The second question reads, can a centralized safe driving program be created for use by all agencies? And at this point, additional discussions are needed to determine if this potentially could be developed as part of a statewide contract or something that OVM does as a standalone product. OVM is currently investigating low-cost driver training options in addition to in-vehicle safety reminders and best practices. We welcome your feedback or suggestions while we're in the discovery phase. And this brings us to our next slide, which we'll get to in just a second. In a moment, 2 poll questions will appear on your screen. We kindly ask that you review them, provide your feedback, and any information that we gather from this poll question will be reviewed by OVM and will help guide in future decision making regarding the potential adoption of a fleet safety program. So, first poll question reads, would your agency be interested in a driver training program? I just ask that you take a minute to review this and answer as you see fit. We'll usually give about 30 to 45 seconds, and I think Karen will call it out when we get to that time mark.
We're 30 seconds or so in, and we've only got 44% voted so far. So people need to click submit a little more. Looks like we've reached our capacity for voting, so we're going to close this out.
Great. I think we had a second poll. There we go. So second poll question reads, would online training be a viable option for your drivers? So please take a minute, review this, and answer as you see fit.
All right, congrats, guys. You're doing a little better. We got 30 seconds in and you're 59% voted. So whoever's left, keep clicking those submit buttons. I think we reached capacity. I'll close that out.
Great.
And then we can share the results for the first one.
Okay. So it looks like the resounding answer is yes, but only if it's free. And then an equal split between yes and I understand there'd be a cost, and no, we do not wish to offer driver training at this point. So this is great. We'll take this back and we'll discuss this with an OVM.
Here's the results for the second one.
Fantastic. And it looks like a good majority of you have web access. So that's a great piece of information too. So thank you for your participation. I'm going to hand the next slides off to Alex for review.
All right. So some more questions to run through here. The next one here is the new rental contract, VEH 112, has fewer options. How do agencies acquire box trucks, longer term rentals, etc.? So the Office of Vehicle Management isn't sort of the sourcing, procurement, and contract authority at OSD, so we're going to certainly do our best to try to provide some guidance and direction on these next couple questions. From our perspective, if there's questions in regards to products, services that are offered on statewide contracts, we would definitely recommend that you start with the contract user guide. Typically, there's enough information provided that it can kind of point you in the direction that you are looking. In the event that the contract user guide doesn't answer those questions, we would definitely recommend that you follow up with the specific OSD sourcing contract manager. And again, the previous slides that we ran through, the contact information for those OSD contract managers are listed on there. And I think we intend to distribute this presentation as well, so you'll have all of that information at your disposal. And so outside of those recommendations, if there's a need for some type of departmental contract to be done, we would recommend that you follow the best value procurement handbook, which is linked in this slide here, and just follow the procurement waiver process as it's outlined. All right, so how do agencies acquire tires specific to trailers? Are they included on current statewide contract? So the feedback I have here is similar to the previous answer that I provided. There should be on VEH 109, which is the statewide contract for tires, there should be trailer tires offered through, it looks like Marathon and Endurance there. In addition to that, FAC 88, another statewide contract that's listed on the previous slide, also offers some tractor trailer and utility trailer tires. In the event that those statewide contracts don't serve the need that you're looking for, it would be a similar process. Contract user guide first, follow up with the contract manager if necessary, and then follow the best value procurement handbook in the event that a departmental contract is needed. Does the lift contracts include service? What are the parameters? So I kind of sound like a broken record here. Sorry about that. Again, same process here. If service isn't offered on that particular statewide contract to provide service to your lifts, then in this case, it seems pretty clear cut. If it's not on there, I think this would probably be more about following that procurement waiver process if necessary. What is the law related to idling for education enforcement with drivers? So for those of you that don't know, there actually is a no idling law in Massachusetts. We cite the actual Massachusetts general law here. So idling for more than 5 minutes, it can be a punishable offense up to a fine of $500. So there was some questions around this, I believe, in the last quarterly outreach meeting. So we just wanted to provide the actual statute law language there and regulation language. So one department is exploring rideshare contract to help client family members' transportation needs. Is there a demand to offer this service on a broader contract? So I think most of us are probably familiar with what rideshare is. For those that don't know, a rideshare transportation contract would essentially be a contract with a company like Uber or Lyft to provide transportation-based services to either employees or clients. In addition to that, we're also looking for some feedback and to explore motor pool programs. So again, for those that don't know, a motor pool program would be similar to a third-party organization, basically pooling vehicles and renting them out on a short-term basis based on employee needs. So essentially what we're looking for here is just an understanding from agency personnel on the desire or need for a rideshare or motor pool type contract. So we're going to walk into our next poll here. So does your agency have a business need for a rideshare or motor pool contract? So if you could take some time and answer that question, it'd be greatly appreciated.
We're about 30 seconds in. We got 48% of the vote. Give it a few more seconds. Except for our capacity. And I'll show the follow-up to that. Give people a few more seconds. We'll close that now. And then I'll share the results for both. The first one.
Interesting.
And then for those that answered yes, we've got the second bit of information. Okay.
All right, appreciate the feedback. All right, and now I'm going to turn it over to Vincent McCosey, who will walk us through vehicle service and sanitation recommendations.
Thanks again, Alex. Before we dive into this information, I'd like to just take a brief moment to remind our audience that VH84A vendor Fleet Response has begun sending out monthly satisfaction surveys to fleet personnel. We kindly ask you to participate if you receive one of these surveys. OVM and sourcing lead Dave Sargent have been working tirelessly to continuously improve VH84A customer experience. Every survey that Fleet Response receives is reviewed by OVM and is used to help ensure agencies receive top tier service. So if you get one of those surveys, we would greatly appreciate your feedback and definitely take it into consideration. With that being said, the information housed within the next few slides speaks to COVID-19, the effects it has on our fleet, and the ways for us to protect both our employees and constituents. So stepping into this particular slide, Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, many repair facilities have either closed or altered their hours of operation to reflect demand. Because of these changes, we strongly recommend that you call the shop in advance to book an appointment. This provides the opportunity to communicate the needed repairs or service over the phone and will reduce the time spent in a facility, limiting the interaction that your driver has with staff and other customers. Another great option is using after-hour drop-offs where available. This allows drivers to drop off a vehicle for service with no physical interaction. So if this style of service is utilized, it's important to contact the shop before to schedule an appointment and ensure they are prepared and aware of the vehicle being dropped off on their property. A third option is mobile fleet maintenance, and OVM has talked about this at a number of quarterlies in the past, but on-site preventative maintenance service is a great way to ensure that your drivers have almost no interaction with the repair facility. There are vendors out there such as Hello Slick or Slick LLC, and they're equipped to come to your location and provide basic PM services such as oil change, tire rotations, wiper blades, etc. So service may be scheduled by visiting their website at helloslick.com. And lastly, sanitize the vehicle upon retrieval. Wipe down commonly touched surfaces in a vehicle with EPA-approved disinfectants. And we actually, OVM, have put the EPA-approved disinfectant link into this slide. So we'll distribute the slide deck out probably after this presentation. You're welcome to click some of the links in here. We've put some really helpful information in for you as far as fleet managers go. So please feel free to take a look at that. Only caution you, please be sure not to use a bleach-based product on automotive interiors, as they may discolor the interior over time. Next slide, please. Okay. To help combat the spread of COVID-19, OVM encourages agencies to regularly sanitize their fleet and practice social distancing. To assist agencies in this, Fleet Response, in partnership with OVM OSD, are actively onboarding mobile fleet sanitation vendors. You can see just a brief list of some of the sanitation vendors we've recently onboarded. Stanley Steamer, J. Bryan Day, Trident Environmental, and Citywide are just a few of many. These vendors use EPA-approved disinfectants and processes to thoroughly clean your vehicles. New vendors are being added frequently, so please feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to provide a complete list of sanitation and cleaning vendors, or you can simply schedule a disinfection with Fleet Response by calling the 1-800 number found in the vehicle packet in the glove box. In addition to professional fleet sanitation, OVM recommends drivers wipe down commonly touched surfaces with an EPA-approved disinfectant, both when entering the vehicle and when leaving, to prevent possible transmission from driver to driver. From the comments that we received during the registration process, we understand that wipes may be difficult to locate. When not available, fleets may utilize any EPA-approved disinfectant to sanitize to protect against COVID-19. And lastly, cabin filters help to reduce airborne particles being circulated through the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. Consider accelerating the frequency of replacement beyond OEM schedules to ensure efficient operation. And as mentioned before, please note that there are multiple hyperlinks in here that you may find helpful. The bottom link here will direct you to CDC guidance for cleaning and disinfecting non-emergency transport vehicles. That would be really helpful for some fleet managers to review. All right. So in the following slides, OVM will take the opportunity to respond to some of the questions or comments received prior to the presentation. Go to the next slide, please. So first, we would like to welcome you to use the chat function now and through the presentation to post questions. I can see that there are many people that are using that, so that's great. We did our best to answer the most common questions around surrounding sanitizing, deep cleaning, and disinfecting. However, if we missed something, please feel free to post it in the chat, and we'll be sure to review it as part of our Q&A section at the end of the presentation. Secondly, there has been some concerns surrounding social distancing and the complications around having more than one individual per vehicle. At this time, OVM recommends agencies create and implement employee distancing policies using guidance from the CDC and the Mass Department of Public Health. Some questions have been posed regarding physical barriers being installed in the vehicle to separate occupants. OVM has investigated this option thoroughly and found there is no direct evidence proving these dividers are more effective at stopping the spread than approved PPE. Most vehicles have one ventilation system which circulates the same air amongst the cabin, and these dividers would not stop the flow of contaminated air throughout the vehicle. Additionally, improperly installed or positioned dividers can be a safety risk in the event of a collision and may interfere with supplementary restraint systems such as airbags. Some better options to abide by social distancing guidelines when state vehicles are being used by other drivers would be to either rent a vehicle through the enterprise short-term rental contract or apply for personal mileage reimbursement where applicable. We recommend you review all feasible options to determine which works best for your agency and its business functions. So next comment, reduced maintenance due to staff shortages during quarantine. So there are a few options if staff shortages are causing difficulties in obtaining maintenance. The first I mentioned a few slides back is mobile service. So Slick Technologies is capable of coming out and doing some basic PM services for you that might help mitigate having to bring vehicles back and forth to vendors. And second, when absolutely necessary, you may schedule a tow from your location to the shop for repairs if it's not feasible to be done by a mobile vendor. Just that there's a handful of options for preventing the transmission of, or preventing drivers from having to go to shops or having two drivers in a vehicle as the driver is taken back from the shop. So many options. If there's any questions in regard to best practices or how to do that, I welcome everybody to reach out to me. I'd be happy to walk through this. And that concludes my portion of this presentation, and I'll be handing it off to Karen Rasnick to answer the remaining questions.
Okay, thanks, Vinny. So the next question on the screen is asking about delays of vehicle production due to the manufacturer shutdowns. While OVM would be happy to try and assist any agency that is having difficulty receiving their new vehicle orders, the real reality of the situation is that many of our FY20 orders will need to be transitioned to FY21 orders. We're actually doing this within OVM. The lease program has several units that just won't be built and shipped before June 30th. Some vehicles aren't even scheduled for production now until July. So the shutdown has kind of shifted everything back several weeks, and we have to kind of adjust with that. We do recommend agencies work with their finance teams to ensure the proper process is followed for that. And then let's see, another item just to make sure you're aware, we don't know yet what the impact on future production will be because of the shutdowns. A lot of manufacturers are doing extra shifts and whatnot to try and do catch up for the weeks that they were shut down. But with social distancing and other things in place, their extra shifts may only be making up for what they would have done with a regular shift because they don't have as many people in the building. So until all of that's worked out, we don't really know what the impact will be. Most manufacturers actually switch over from one model year to the next in the summer. And because of all the catch up that's going on, that may be delayed a little bit. So you'll have to make sure you work really closely with your dealers that you're ordering vehicles through to understand what the actual lead time is for these vehicles to make sure you've got the right expectations set from the beginning. I think that's all I had to say. This last question I'm going to send back to Alex.
Thanks, Karen and Vinny. Appreciate it. So next question, vehicles are being driven less. Do we still have to meet annual mileage requirements? So this is a good question, and it's kind of a two-part answer. So I think first, we want to make sure that we're still getting odometer readings. So the expectation is that we're still getting odometer reporting, which is sent to OVM team member Raphael Miller on a monthly basis. In the event that vehicles are down right now because they're just not being utilized and there's a concern around hitting utilization requirements, I would ask that you email me and just let me know that. If there's specific vehicle information or blocks of vehicles that are just not going to be utilized because of the current situation we're in, we would appreciate just knowing that if it's not going to be provided through the odometer report. Also, I think now is probably an important time to ensure that driver logs are being updated, specifically with employee information. In the event that there is a positive COVID-19 result, and it could potentially impact a state vehicle, we would want to know and obviously have that vehicle pulled out of service so it could be appropriately decontaminated and sanitized. So we just wanted to kind of put that out there as a reminder and a potential best practice. Great. So I'm going to actually turn this over now to our colleagues on the Leading by Example team at DOER. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric Friedman.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Just want to make sure you can hear me and see me.
Crystal clear.
Excellent. Thank goodness for technology. So Alex, thanks so much for turning it over to us and for inviting us to participate in this quarterly meeting. I'm very happy to be here and want to welcome everyone to Electric Vehicles 101, as well as our proposed ride and drive event that unfortunately is not going to be happening today, as all of you can imagine. That part of our event that we had hoped to have today is postponed indefinitely. Here's an example of what our ride and drive might have looked like had we held it today. And so my job is really to really introduce this session, and I will speak very, very briefly on some of the high-level policies and environmental benefits associated with electric vehicles in general. And then I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues from the Drive Green program at the Green Energy Consumers Alliance, as well as other colleagues from the state within our office at DOER and DEP to talk about some other elements related to electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging stations and some of the funding that is available for electric vehicles. I should point out that many of the things we are talking about here today are in response to some of the questions that many of you raised at a previous meeting. So thank you to all of you who participated in that session. Now it seems like a lifetime ago, in helping us understand what some of the challenges are and what some of the questions you have related to electric vehicles. So hopefully this presentation today will answer at least some of those questions, and all of us remain available to continue to answer any other questions you may have. So to jump in at the high level, I think as we all know, certainly before we entered into this pandemic period, we were aware of many of the greenhouse gas emission reduction goals and strategies and planning efforts underway in the state. This is a high priority of the governor and this administration. And perhaps many of you saw recently that the governor came out with a new goal for 2050 that he labeled a net zero goal as opposed to an 80% reduction. And that has prompted some very difficult and very comprehensive planning efforts underway to look at how we can reduce emissions significantly by 2050. And this is, of course, across the entire Commonwealth. One of the largest areas of emissions in the Commonwealth actually are related to transportation emissions. More than 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions now come from transportation, many of those light-duty vehicles, single occupancy vehicles, and so forth. And the roadmap that is currently underway will, of course, be looking at strategies and ways to electrify many of the fleets and many of the personal vehicles in use in Massachusetts. On a more local level, more relevant to many of us, we too in state government have goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, currently working under an 80% reduction by 2050 target. Unlike the state, our emissions associated with vehicles tend to make up a smaller portion of our total emissions. They're around 10% or so. And our emissions, like in the state, have actually been increasing, certainly relative to our overall emissions, and in absolute numbers, emissions from fleets in the state fleets have been increasing as well, up about 10% over the last 15 years or so. And I think, as we have mentioned previously, there are lots of efforts underway to work with many of you to identify some early opportunities to switch our gasoline-powered vehicles to electric vehicle opportunities. So with that as kind of the overall context, I wanted to try and just address a couple of, I think, questions that are out there and perhaps some confusing information that sometimes floats out there. The biggest one being, oh, aren't electric vehicles really dirty anyway because we're just using coal and burning brown power, and who cares if we plug it in versus gas? It's still bad for the planet. And that is certainly true to some degree, in the sense that we do get our electricity from fossil fuels. Much of our electricity is from fossil fuels. But I think as you can see, if you can see this map, it's a little bit small, so I'll try and explain it at a high level. The emissions coming from electricity have actually been dramatically reducing over time. So in less than 10 years, we have seen significant increases in the amount of cleaner electricity, renewable electricity being generated across the country, such that virtually in every part of the country, a electric vehicle is equivalent to a gasoline-powered vehicle of at least 40 or 50 miles per gallon, and in many areas, including New England, it can exceed the equivalency of 100 miles per gallon in terms of the emissions coming from those electric vehicles. This trend is only expected to continue as renewable energy becomes cheaper and more prevalent here in New England for sure, and across many parts of the country. Next slide. So another reason that electric vehicles tend to be a much cleaner option is their efficiency. I think we'll hear a little bit more about this from Drive Green, but just at a high level, internal combustion engines operate at around 30% or less efficiency, converting energy from gasoline to actual power used, while electric vehicles actually convert something like 75% of the energy into actual power. For any of you who have driven an electric vehicle, you will see that efficiency represented by the performance of those vehicles and the rapid acceleration that you can see when driving those vehicles. And I think we have one more, maybe two more. There are a number of policies and funding opportunities. We're going to talk more about those, and I'm not going to go into a lot of details on this, but suffice it to say that both on a statewide level and also at a local state government level, there are a number of targets, of goals, and efforts underway to electrify our fleets, electrify vehicles across the Commonwealth, including some incentives, both at the fleet level and at the personal level, and a number of really high-level commitments being made by this administration to electrify our fleets over the next several decades. Next. And we're going to end this section by just doing a poll. I know we've talked anecdotally with you, but we wanted to ask what, if you could pick one of your biggest challenge preventing your fleet from acquiring PEVs, we'd like you to check off cost, model availability, range anxiety, driver reluctance, or safety and maintenance concerns. So folks could just check that off. Karen, are we limited to one here, or can they choose more than one?
I believe they can choose more than one if
Okay.
it applies to them.
All right. But you can't choose all five. I guess you could, if you'd like to.
So we're going to give it a few more seconds. We've only got 45% voted right now, so keep clicking.
Well, I didn't vote.
I think we may have reached our capacity here, so we'll close that out and then share the results.
Interesting. So pretty evenly split between the cost, the model availability, and the range anxiety or the lack of charging infrastructure. All right, good to know. That's very interesting. All right, and so with that, I'm going to end that section of the presentation and turn it over to our friends from the Green Energy Consumers Alliance to kind of walk us through some more details about electric vehicles and some of the specifications and interesting elements. Mal, I'll turn it over to you. Make sure you're unmuted, Mal. Oh, I think you're muted.
Can she hear us?
I don't know. Karen, can you unmute her?
She is.
Oh, can't hear you.
Yeah,
I'm giving her the
it
signal.
says that she's not muted, so I'm not sure what the issue may be.
Let's try.
Again, everyone, welcome to our first virtual outreach meeting, and welcome to the technical difficulties.
There was no way we were going to get through the whole session without at least one technical difficulty. So hopefully this is it.
Okay, we can hear you.
You're on.
Can I get a thumbs up?
You're good.
Great. Okay, sorry about that, folks. So I'll just start from the beginning. My name is Mal Skoran. I am a program associate for Green Energy Consumers Alliance, and we're a nonprofit, and our mission is to try and empower consumers to make green energy choices. Mostly the program that I work on is called Drive Green, and our goal is to try and get electric cars on the road in place of gasoline-powered cars. So I mostly work in talking to consumers to get them on board. But during my time, I've noticed that fleets and fleet managers have started to integrate electric vehicles into their fleets with a lot of success. So I'm really excited to be talking about electric cars here today with you all. I just want to recognize this is an unprecedented time. And I think moving into online meetings in the last couple months has made it especially clear to me that adjusting to new technology is hard. And electric cars will, be a bit of an adjustment just because they're new and different from what we're used to with gasoline-powered cars. But I hope today can be the beginning of and about all the benefits of making. So because they're new, I want to take a second to just explain how electric motors work. So they're pretty simple. They're induction motors. So what happens is electric current flows from the battery, and that creates a magnetic field. And the magnets in the motor start to rotate in that magnetic field, and that's what causes the wheels to spin. So it's pretty simple. The more current you have, the more torque that you'll get. And it's pretty linearly correlated. So that means there's no transmission or gears to switch. And there's also no burning of fuel. There's no emissions, and there's no idling. I believe someone mentioned about anti-idling laws a little bit earlier. And you don't really have to worry about that with an electric vehicle, because when it's not moving, it's not using energy unless you're, blasting the AC. But all in all, there are about 20 moving parts in an electric motor. Compared to combustion engines, they're really, really simple. So in a combustion engine, you have a controlled explosion of fuel and air, and that drives a piston. And because you don't get a linear amount of torque according to the rotation of that piston, you need a transmission in order to actually spin the wheels and make sure that you're driving in the gear to accommodate the car speed that you want. So it's a much more complicated system than an electric car. And so because it's more complicated, you have all of these additional parts to make the entire vehicle work. So a bunch of them are listed on there. Each of those additional parts is something that could potentially go wrong and cause difficulty in repairs and maintenance with the vehicle. And so I'll talk more about what that simplicity means for the cost of electric cars in a little bit. But one really important factor that makes electric cars a better option for you on your balance sheet is the lower fuel costs. So electricity is generally much cheaper than gasoline. And so drivers that switch to electric cars notice that they spend on their fuel costs when they switch to compare gasoline and electricity on an apples to apples basis. Generally, drivers in Massachusetts will save about $560 a year, depending on what the gas prices are at the time. So obviously, gas prices have fallen tremendously over the last couple of weeks because fewer people are driving and there's not as much of a demand for it. And so you'll notice that the cost of gasoline can be changing according to what the global market for oil is. Electricity, on the other hand, is a locally produced resource, and its prices are regulated by government bodies. And so what that means is you can account for electricity prices to be pretty consistent over the long term, whereas gasoline can be down one day and up the next. And so over the long term, drivers see savings when they switch to electricity, but electricity can also be counted on as a consistently priced fuel source, whereas gasoline is very volatile. So because of the simplicity of electric cars that I talked about earlier, in addition to savings on fuel costs, drivers are also seeing savings in maintenance and service and repairs as well. So there are fewer parts that could possibly be damaged or need repair in an electric vehicle. And the battery, motor, and electronics in electric cars require very little maintenance. So pretty much most people, if you have an electric vehicle, you don't need to go in and get your oils changed. You don't need to check on spark plugs or, replace engine air filters. So all of that maintenance essentially disappears. Even the brake pads in electric vehicles last longer because of regenerative braking. And regenerative braking is the same technology that made the original Toyota Prius hybrid so much more efficient than other gas-powered cars. Basically, what it does is when you're driving downhill or when you're pushing on the brake, instead of losing that energy to friction in the brake pads, you're recharging the car's battery with energy that previously would have been lost. And so what that means is the car is less or more efficient, and it saves all of that energy and stores it for later. And that's easier on the brake pads, so they don't wear out as quickly. So that's just one example as to how electric cars require less maintenance. And you can actually see it when you compare the maintenance schedules for different cars. So first up is sedans. Sedans have mostly been the first to electrify because they're small and lightweight, so they're a little bit more efficient when you put a battery into it. And you'll notice that most EV owners only really need to replace their windshield wipers and rotate their tires every so often. So it's much lower maintenance requirements than gas-powered cars, which need oil checks and all the other things I mentioned before. Up there, you'll see, so I just want to define PHEV, which is something that can be confusing for some folks. That's a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. And generally, what that means is there's a small battery that you can plug in. So it'll get about 20 to 50 miles of electric range. And then there's also that gas battery drivers on long trips. So those vehicles also have combustion engines, and so they generally need all of the maintenance upkeep as gas-powered cars. But because a portion of their miles are driven on the electric motor, you generally see less wear and tear on the engine. And so even those vehicles with combustion engines tend to require less maintenance as well. So SUVs are coming onto the market very quickly. And we see the same pattern is less overall maintenance requirements and more savings, which is important because SUVs are particularly typically higher duty vehicles, and so tend to be more expensive when it comes to maintenance, whereas electric vehicles continue to deliver on the savings there. So just to put a solid number on this, AAA did a study comparing electric vehicles to gas-powered cars according to what owners report paying in maintenance over the cost or the life of the car. And 9 cents per mile to drive a typical, up to 9.9 cents if you're in an SUV. But electric cars about 30% lower than that because of the additional reliability that you get from electric motors and the lack of maintenance. So over the first 5 years of the vehicle's lifetime, you can expect to save about $1,800 from that reliability. But then moving beyond that, the data has shown that electric cars continue to be reliable and don't need as much maintenance, whereas the gas-powered cars tend to give out. And so during years 5 to 8 of the vehicle's life, you can see even more savings. And if you drive an electric car all the way up to 150,000 miles, then savings can be as much as $3,500 over the lifetime. But again, because these cars do not wear out as quickly as gas-powered cars, it's very likely that electric cars will be able to be driven for longer miles and for a long than their gas-powered counterparts. So even AAA's numbers are a little conservative. According to fleet managers for New York City, they've reported much higher savings than even the AAA study has reported, and found that in 1 year, the Chevy Bolt, which is an all-electric vehicle that gets about 260 miles on a full charge, it only costs about $200 to maintain for the year, compared to cars that are comparable size. It's almost 9 times that amount, which is significantly higher than what AAA had estimated. And again, most EV drivers report paying even less than this. So it's quite remarkable in terms of cost of ownership. So I noticed that in the poll, there the upfront vehicles, which is a major concern for both fleet managers and consumers that are car shopping. But when you take into account this lower cost of ownership for electric vehicles, you see savings over the lifetime. The good news is that there are incentives available to help take the sticker price of the car down to a more manageable level. And then over the lifetime of the car, because of savings from fuel costs as well as maintenance costs, it ends up being a really smart financial decision. So you'll see in pretty much every column, the EV, the Hyundai Kona, is beating out its comparably sized gas-powered car. So that's for energy costs and maintenance costs as well. So if you are taking into account all of those additional costs, it makes sense now to change. And I do want to address EV safety, just because electric vehicles are new. And so some people do have concerns about whether it's safe to be driving in a vehicle that has a battery instead of a gas engine. And the fact is that electric vehicles undergo the same amount of safety testing as gas-powered cars do. And in fact, they also have to meet some additional requirements because the vehicles are different. So in the case of an accident, the battery is isolated from the chassis of the vehicle to prevent any concerns about, that high voltage electricity being exposed to people. But in addition to those additional safety requirements, testing has found that electric vehicles are some of the safest cars that you can be driving right now. That's because the battery pack of the car is usually located in the floor of the vehicle, and so that means it has a low center of mass and a low potential to flip over in the event of a serious crash. In addition, because they are simpler and the engine is much smaller, engineers are able to design a better crumple zone to protect the people inside of the car. And we see that playing out for all kinds of vehicles in different ways. But consistently, electric vehicles are getting some of the best ratings from safety organizations from the federal government. And range also was another concern that showed up in the polls. And for the most part, anxiety of not having enough miles on your car has kind of subsided. So even compared to 4 years ago, electric cars driving ranges than they did. Just the standard was about 150 miles per charge, and now most vehicles coming out have about 250 miles per charge. We saw that with the Hyundai Kona that I talked about a little earlier, and that range is growing quickly while prices are dropping. And so most consumers are finding that electric vehicles are able to meet their daily driving needs. The average is about 40 miles driven per day for most people. But it really, as long as you have a stable place to charge, then range anxiety should not be a problem. And for those vehicles that do need to go hundreds of miles in a day, there are those plug-in hybrid vehicles available with additional gas engines in order to extend range and help consumers make that transition. But again, you don't get that additional maintenance and repair savings as you do with the fully electric vehicle. Excuse me. So it's kind of a trade-off there. And then finally, these vehicles are fun to drive. I know I just threw a lot of information at you, but I hope you all have the opportunity at some point in the future to get into one of these vehicles and try them out for yourself. In part because, you can make an argument about maintenance savings and fuel savings all day. But ultimately, the thing that is driving EV adoption is the fact that people love these cars. They get instant torque, so you can drive really quickly and have that great acceleration. They're zippy and have good handling, and they're also quiet. You don't have the roar of a combustion engine, and people really tend to just love the experience of driving in an electric vehicle. And so I know this event was originally supposed to have a ride and drive component, and I do hope that's able to be organized at some point because there's a big difference there. And I know folks probably have plenty of questions, so my information is listed there. Email is probably the best place to reach me if you have specific questions, but I'm looking forward to answering some at the end. Thank you.
Chelsea, I think you're muted.
Good now?
Can hear you now.
All right, good.
Good to go.
Yeah, thank you, Mal. That was incredibly informative. I think we are excited about having a ride and drive at a later point in time, so people can test out some of these cars because they really are fun. And I think it's a great segue into a next poll before starting the next section. And now that you've heard a little bit about the benefits of EVs, I think we're really interested to know what you most look forward to, if anything, hopefully, when thinking about deploying EVs in your own fleet.
We're about 30 seconds in. We've got 52% of the vote. Those last few people, we'll give a few seconds. And I think we'll close it out now. And I will share those results.
Interesting. So reducing emissions and pollution, yes, That's what I would say, but that's great to see that other people agree. Reduced maintenance. I think Mal's presentation really just sort of drove that home. And I see some people selected nothing, which is, we'll just have to keep working on you. You're for the ride and drive. All right, so next slide. So I'm Chelsea Keene. I'm with the Department of Energy Resources. And next, I want to talk a bit about the EV charging landscape and really the key aspects you need to take into account when purchasing and charging electric vehicles. So a good place to start is with the types of charging. While there's a lot to consider with EV charging, charger types fall into 3 broad categories, and knowing which of those categories is right for you will really depend on the needs and habits of your fleet. Level 1 chargers are the sort of base option and can be as simple as plugging into an existing 120-volt outlet at your facilities. They're really ideal for low to moderate use vehicles and are convenient if you don't want to invest in new infrastructure. However, they do provide the slowest charge, so they're best suited for places where you have overnight or extended parking access. Level 2 chargers are the next step up and easily the most common charger type. They are a very, very versatile option. They're great for that medium use workplace scenario. You can charge multiple vehicles simultaneously, and they do provide a faster charge than the level 1s. So you're then getting between 10 and 25 miles per hour for that charge. However, they do often require a new 240 volt line and are a bit more expensive. And then finally, we have DC fast chargers. These tend to be the most valuable on long trips because they provide a very speedy charge. Because of that, they're best suited for high traffic places like highway corridors. And while the fast charge capability is great, they are also by far the most expensive option and generally just not needed for average use at workplace or fleet sites. Next slide. So we worked hard to get a bunch of variety onto the VH102 contract to support charging infrastructure options. There are now 20 vendors on contract, and they offer a mix of level 1 through DC fast chargers. But in addition to that, there are also a handful of innovative charging solutions. And while I can't get into all of them, I think a couple of examples are important. And one is a small mobile charging unit that can be stored in your trunk. And I use this as an example because it could be good for drivers that travel to various remote locations that might not have charging easily available. And there's also a solar plus charging option that is also transportable. And I say this because it's a potential alternative if you're located at a lease site. I know that's a concern for many people. Or if you have concerns about incurring demand charges, because the solar provides all the power for the charging. So those are just kind of 2 interesting examples. And then on top of that, there are also an array of charging customizations that can be selected to best fit the needs of your fleet. Next slide. And in addition to choosing the type of charger and features you want, location is also really important. And this really comes down to identifying where you will need to charge your fleet most regularly. Making some really high level assumptions about driving habits, we estimated that on average, vehicles drive somewhere between 33 and 100 miles a day. But because most new EVs on the market today have ranges that well exceed 150 miles, that means that the majority of your charging will most likely happen at your facilities rather than on the road, because you're never sort of exceeding that upper limit in a day driven. So, if you have one central location that acts as a hub for your vehicles, then it might be the best place to put those chargers. If you have distributed offices, then maybe having a couple chargers at each of them makes more sense. And by selecting those kind of correct and most efficient locations, it increases the convenience of having an EV and not having to fuel up on the road. And just a note to support that, that fueling transition for EVs, OVM has worked with WEX to incorporate ChargePoint so that you can use your card just as you would with a conventional fueling station, which is great. So of course, you won't always be able to charge at your facility, but that's where the broader charging infrastructure can support those longer trips. There are currently 160 charging stations at our state-owned facilities, which can support your charging needs if you're going to another site or a nearby location. And there's a much broader network of publicly accessible charging across the state, which includes some of those over 80 fast chargers, those really quick charging units that are great for emergency situations. And this infrastructure is growing rapidly and will only continue to do so. Next slide. And because EV charging does have costs associated with it, we just wanted to highlight some of the funding mechanisms currently available. Both National Grid and Eversource are providing infrastructure funding, which covers 100% of costs up to the charger itself. In addition to that, National Grid is offering funding for charging equipment. And those programs have preferred installers and or equipment, many of which are on statewide contract VH 102. All the funding amounts do sort of vary depending on location and charging type. But in addition to that, DEP's Mass EVIC program offers both equipment and EV funding, which Haiti is going to cover in just a few minutes. So while there are upfront costs to consider that are associated with EV charging, there's also a lot of financial support to help with infrastructure expansion. And before handing it over to DEP, I just want to highlight some of the EV models that are currently available on state contract. We have three full battery electric options, and hopefully a fourth with the Hyundai Kona SUV coming soon. I know we have a lot of Rogues in the fleet, so this would be a potential alternative to those. And we also have 5 plug-in hybrids, including the Pacifica minivan. So if you don't feel comfortable going full electric right off the bat, these are a really great transition technology. Plus, we're working to get new vehicles on contract as they come to market. And that's what really kind of brings this to the next phase of EVs. We know the state fleet is heavy on trucks and vans, and we wanted to remind everyone sort of where the market's going. Dozens and dozens of new models are slated to roll out over the next few years. But we just wanted to highlight here that you will start to see more vehicle classes that more easily fit the needs of your fleets. So while you might not be able to replace your truck or van this year, options are certainly coming. Next slide. And finally, because there's a lot to consider with both EVs and charging, we just want to remind everyone that there are an abundance of resources, both in-house, things that we've worked on at DOER, and just available to the broader public to help inform and support the electrification of fleets. And with that, I will hand it off to DEP to talk about Mass EVIP and 3D regs.
Thanks, Chelsea. Hi, everyone. My name is Haiti Janik. I work for the Department of Environmental Protection in the branch of Transportation Management Programs. Quick shout out to Eric and Mal and Chelsea for those presentations. It really sets me up to give you guys some even better news than all the emission savings that you will have for those of you who care about the environment, and for all the maintenance costs and fuel cost savings, for those for whom that's the most important thing. We have money for you. We have a program called the Massachusetts Electric Vehicle Incentive Program. The Mass EVIP programs have been around for many years, and the ones that I'm going to talk about today are the ones that pertain to your fleets. We have 2 different programs for workplace charging, and then another one that's for charging your actual vehicles that are used for work for your fleet. And I just want to also mention that we have different sources of funding, and right now we are working on spending the $75 million that Massachusetts received as part of the Volkswagen settlement trust. Some of you may have heard that Volkswagen was caught cheating on emissions for some of their diesel vehicles, and the result of that is that they had to put money into helping states who are affected by those vehicles being in their states to replace them with more efficient vehicles, so electric vehicles. So our workplace charging program is currently funded out of that Volkswagen money, $1.5 million right now for charging stations. There's a limit of 50,000 per address. And this is for workers who drive EVs to work to be able to charge at work. The maximum funding is going to be 60%, and it's for the equipment, and it's on a rolling basis. So it's open. It's open right now. And it's open to also, it mentions here, not just public, but private fleets, but for you guys, yeah, open for you. And also we have a fleets charging program, and that one has about $500,000 open right now. It's also on a rolling basis. That will give you $7,500 per EV. And sorry, that's actually going to talk about EVs in a second. This is for charging stations. So it's $2,500 for a dual port charging station, which means you can charge 2 EVs at the same time. And that will go towards equipment. And if the equipment costs less than that, towards some of the installation as well. It's open to all public fleets, and that's also rolling. And these are for level 2 charging stations that were already covered. So these are the charging levels that will allow you to plug your vehicles in probably overnight and get a decent amount of charge back. If not, fill it back up if it wasn't completely depleted. And there was briefly on that slide also a mention, just in case anyone is interested or works with anybody who deals with housing developments or public housing, we do have a program for multi-unit dwellings. So the Mass EVIP fleets program for the vehicles themselves, there's as was mentioned before, is $7,500 per battery electric vehicle. So that's a full battery electric vehicle. And please do note that there's a limit at the moment for up to 25 vehicles per entity, but that's quite a few vehicles that you can get for your fleet. And then if you are interested in trying out a plug-in hybrid vehicle, one that runs on some battery and then also a gasoline engine, we will also give $5,000 per plug-in hybrid as well. And if anybody has motorcycles that they use in their fleets, there's a credit for that for $750. And then if you get for a minimum of 2 battery electric vehicles, you can also get the charging station funding. So that's eligible to all cities and towns, public universities and colleges, state agencies. We would love to answer any questions you have. We have program coordinators who can answer all your questions. I've been working on the program for years, and we'd love to hear from you. If our contact information isn't on a slide, you can find us at Mass DEP. You can Google Mass EVIP, EVIP. You can ask your fleets folks at OSD to give you our contact information. And with that, I want to, I think, pass it on to my colleague Na Huang, who's going to talk to you about some the regulations that affect you in regards to fleet efficiency.
Thanks, Haiti. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. So I am going to talk about the 3D regulations, which is also known as the Mass DEP 60.06 carbon dioxide emission limits for the state fleet passenger vehicles. This regulation took effect back in August 2017, and it sets limits on the carbon dioxide, or CO2, for passenger vehicles that's owned or leased by the Commonwealth of Mass. And it also established the annually declining greenhouse gas emissions, also known as GHG. So currently there are 6 executive offices that have to comply with this regulation because the fleet has to have at least 30 or more vehicles. So this requirement starts for calendar year 2018 to 2025 and beyond. And this regulation also requires executive offices to report the types and the amount of fuel used for their passenger vehicles fleet. And offices have to submit the data or the report to Mass DEP annually by March 1st of each year. So it's the responsibility of the executive office coordinator to submit this fuel use data report to us. And the coordinator must also assure that all the 3D requirements are met. Usually the coordinator is appointed by your secretary to serve as a climate change coordinator. So this person is our contact to get the data. And so this regulation has an annual CO2 limit that was developed from the 2016 WACS data and other sources to develop the Executive Office's annual CO2 passenger vehicle emission limits. When we did this, we didn't have good data, so this could have included non-passenger vehicles. So we recalculated the Executive Office's caps and limits by using the 2017 WACS data. This was provided to us from OSD, and it's more accurate and it's more improved than the 2016 data. So we recommend executive offices to file a petition with us, Mass DEP, to revise your CO2 limits. So this 2017 data from OSD shouldn't include the non-passenger vehicles. So we recalculate the caps for the executive offices with only the passenger vehicles. So again, it's beneficial for executive offices to petition to us to have the new limits to only include passenger vehicles. We've sent this to your coordinator, and we're waiting to hear back. Once we hear back from your coordinator, we would recalculate your caps and limits. So that's pretty much all I have, my portion of presentation. So I wanted to move into the questions portion. Again, if you have questions, please type them in the chat function. I believe we'll answer those at the end of all the presentations. But now we want to ask you questions. Mostly, we want to know if you've been contacted to verify your vehicle fleet. So this would give us some ideas on how to address some of the barriers on data submission, and we'll look into the potential solution. So the first two questions are poll. So if you can just, let me give you a definition again for the office coordinator. Basically, someone who's appointed by your secretary to serve as a climate change coordinator. So this person is our contact and is responsible for getting the reports and data to us. So if you can just choose your answer.
We're about 30 seconds in. We've got about 44% of people voting. So you could, those other stragglers, just click your answer and submit. That'd be great. Give you a few more seconds. We've reached our capacity here, so we're going to close that out. And then we'll move on to the next poll.
Next question is, have you been contacted by your coordinator to provide or verify your fleet vehicle data? Please choose one of the answers.
Again, we're at 30 seconds in. We've only got about 50% of the vote. If we get a few more answers, that would be great. I think we'll close this one out now. Thanks. Now we'll go ahead and share the results of the first.
Okay, so I guess most of you don't know who your executive office coordinator is. That's good to know.
Okay. And then the second results.
Wow, we kind of expected that. 90% have not been contacted. That could be the reason why we haven't gotten any of the data back. So that's good information. Thank you. So this question, if you can just use your chat function to describe any barriers you might have to provide this data to Mass DEP. And I don't know if we want to give a few moments, or I can just hand it over to John Martin to talk about telematics.
Thank you. We'll hop into this, and then if there are any questions, we can address them at the very end. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Martin. I am the telematics data analyst for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Office of Vehicle Management. Most of you should have gotten an email from me a few weeks back, and essentially just detailing that telematics is something that is going to be on the horizon for the executive branch. We received overwhelmingly positive feedback on that email, so I appreciate that, and we're very excited that a lot of fleet managers out there have a lot of excitement for some of the data that they're going to have access to. So if you did not receive that email, please let me know at the end, and I'll happily forward it to you. In the email, it detailed some of the reports that you're going to have access to. There was an example of some of the data that fleet managers are going to be able to look at. But for those of you who either didn't get that email or who are a little bit less familiar with telematics, we're going to start by diving into that right now. So what is telematics? Telematics is a system that connects information technology with telecommunications. It has evolved over the years and narrowly associates with GPS tracking or fleet telematics. So a device is installed in the vehicle, typically in the OBD2 port underneath the driver's side dashboard, which then uses cellular networks to transmit data to the end user. The data is stored in the cloud, which in this case will be Amazon Web Services, which makes the information available to access from any device with an internet connection. So what's going to happen is fleet managers and applicable fleet personnel will be granted credentials to log into a portal, and you'll be able to see data points on the health and well-being of your fleet at any time. So the portal that you log into is only going to have information on your vehicles. You're not going to be able to see other agencies' vehicles, and likewise, they will not be able to see the data points on your vehicles. So what does fleet telematics do? Telematics provides real-time data and empowers users to solve unique state fleet business challenges, which include but are not limited to the location of your vehicles, the manner of which your vehicles and equipment are utilized, the amount of greenhouse gas your vehicles are emitting into the atmosphere, diagnostic trouble codes. If there is an accident or a maintenance issue with your vehicle, you will immediately be notified. And we hope that telematics will be able to reduce operating expenses through the complete optimization of our fleet. So telematics is a technology that's recently been adopted really all across the United States and the world. But just this is a short list of some public sector entities that have adopted telematics in recent years. There's quite a few number of states. Again, this does not include every state or every city, but it's just a short list to give you an idea who else is using it. So why are they using it? They're using it because there's quite a few benefits of using telematics. So the data becomes accessible in real time with telematics and allows the Office of Vehicle Management and Department Fleet Managers to manage fleet activity proactively versus reactively. So in the chart below, you can see a number of different benefits that telematics provides you if you have that software installed inside the vehicle. So vehicle utilization, we're able to better understand how our vehicles are being used. Currently right now, two things that drivers are manually recording every time at the beginning and conclusion of their trip are the miles driven and the trips per day. With telematics, that process largely goes away. There is still going to be a driver log, but a lot of that information is just going to be captured automatically and will be available for fleet managers to view at any time. Telematics also allows us to do vehicle and equipment trip routing in addition to fleet right sizing. If your fleet has too few or too many vehicles, we'll be able to justify that with the data. And additionally, we all understand, we live in Massachusetts, especially those of us in Eastern Mass. A lot of times there's really bad traffic, so we want to make sure that we're able to route our vehicles on the most efficient and optimal path possible. We're also able to better understand fuel consumption. So fuel consumption from a variety of different standpoints. We've got vehicle idling, so are we wasting fuel by idling unnecessarily? We want to understand from a greenhouse gas emissions perspective how much fuel we're consuming and how much carbon we're emitting into the air. And additionally, we want to understand how much money we're spending on fuel and if any of those areas can be reduced. So we've got diagnostic trouble codes. We touched on that. That's another benefit of telematics. So again, if your vehicle's involved in an accident, you will immediately be notified through the portal, or you can have an email directly sent to you. Diagnostic trouble codes allow us to be notified if there's, from a maintenance perspective, for example, if there's your check engine light goes on, the fleet manager will immediately be notified, and hopefully they'll be able to get out ahead of the problem and understand that they need to get that vehicle into the shop as soon as possible, rather than relying on the driver to tell you. If the driver forgets, the check engine light stays on, the problem persists, and it could get worse. So telematics also allows us to understand vehicle speed. Obviously, we want all of our drivers in the Commonwealth to be operating in a safe and respectable manner. Operational efficiency, with the elimination of manual processes and associated with driver logs and odometer submissions, and just the total optimization of the fleet, we hope to become more efficient in the way that we operate our fleet. And we also hope to encourage a culture of transparency, as all of these vehicles are taxpayer-funded assets. So telematics impact on the greenhouse gas emissions. This is obviously a pretty big sticking point with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Telematics may be utilized as a key driver in the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions within the Commonwealth state fleet. Now, this can be done as a result of reduced vehicle miles traveled. And additionally, it can be done as a result of an overall reduction in fuel consumption and gallons used. So each year, Massachusetts uses more than 2.2 million gallons of fuel to power the state fleet. So on the conservative end of things, we project that we'll be able to save at least 155,000 gallons of gas per year. And on the higher end, we project that we'll be able to save upwards of 300,000 gallons of gas per year. Now, if we consider that according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, about 19.6 pounds of CO2e are produced from burning a single gallon of gasoline, if we're to take our low and high end estimates and multiply that out by the 19.6 figure there, we arrive at the graph below, where the low end, we're saving at least 3.1 million pounds of CO2 per year, and on the high end, we are saving upwards of 6.2 million pounds of CO2 annually. Now, those numbers, if you're to look on the far right-hand side of that chart, those numbers directly equate to, or are the equivalent of, at a minimum 293 cars coming off the road, and at a minimum 586 cars coming off the road. So one thing I just want to point out, we're not saying that we are going to remove almost 600 vehicles from the fleet. We're simply saying that by installing telematics, the benefits of which are a reduction in CO2 emissions, which would be the equivalent of 600 vehicles disappearing. So all of that sounds fantastic, but how much is it going to cost your agency? So on the left-hand side, we have the price breakout. So there is a one-time device cost per unit of $150, which the Operational Services Division will assume that one-time fee. Beneath that, we have the monthly subscription costs, which agencies will assume. Those numbers are broken out on a tiered basis. So for the first 500 vehicles that we install telematics devices in, the price per vehicle per month is $17.95. Once the executive branch has at least 500 units installed, the price then drops down per vehicle per month to $16.95. And then once the executive branch as a whole has at least 2,500 telematics devices installed, the price drops down to the lowest price point of $15.95 per vehicle per month. So invoicing for the said pricing will occur via the Office of Vehicle Management's chargeback model. In our implementation strategy on the right-hand side, we are going to start with drivers who were approved for domicile privileges. I believe there are somewhere between 150 and 200 of them. Those are across all different agencies. If you were approved for domicile, you will be the first to get a telematics device installed in your vehicle. We project that that process will take about 2 to 3 weeks to implement, probably on the quicker side there. From there, we're going to start with the largest agencies, and we're going to start working our way down. So we're just literally going to schedule time with the largest agencies, and the reason that we're doing it that way is because we want to eclipse the lowest price tier possible. So we project that the installation timeline for all executive branch vehicles, there are about 3,500 vehicles that will be getting telematics devices installed. We project that that timeline will occur over about 4 months. Next slide, please. So where we are now, currently we are in discussions with applicable collective bargaining units. Once that is wrapped up, each fleet manager will be contacted by the Operational Services Division's Office of Vehicle Management several weeks prior to installations to discuss inventory, installation location, and schedule considerations. So all of that is really just a fancy way to say, once we wrap this up, I will be contacting the fleet manager to figure out what date and time works best for you. Once the inventory list is finalized, a confirmation email will be sent to both the vendor and the agency fleet manager. This will serve as essentially a receipt between all three parties, the three parties being the Office of Vehicle Management, the fleet manager for the agency, as well as the vendor. And it will essentially just state that we are all in agreement that on this date and time, we are going to come out and install telematics devices in the vehicles. So the hardware is going to be delivered to the Operational Services Division and transported to the installation location on the scheduled day of installation. I am going to personally have these either shipped to my house or to my office, depending on where we are with the coronavirus at the time. And I will personally be driving these devices out to the location of installation. Fleet managers will be required to have all scheduled vehicles and associated keys present at the time of installation. I don't anticipate this will be an issue. I mean, we're working this out several weeks in advance. And I just want to sort of reiterate that this is not going to be something where I call you and I say, guess what, we're coming out on Thursday. We're going to have this worked out several weeks in advance so that everybody knows what's expected of them. So I don't anticipate that to be a problem. And I look forward to working with many of the fleet managers in the months to come. So with that, that concludes my portion of the presentation, and I know we're going to have a Q&A session shortly after this, but I do want to turn it back over to Alex Gianantonio for some closing remarks.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. John, thank you. Thank you to all the presenters. So we're right about at 2:40 here. We have about an extra 20 minutes. I guess we went a little bit over what we had initially anticipated, but that's good. I think there was a lot of great ground and good content to cover today. So I think we will start going through some of the questions here. If you all have questions, comments, please use the chat function. That's essentially how we're going to be handling any incoming questions so we can provide answers. I see here that there was one question in regards to WEX connection to ChargePoint. Cheryl, has that been addressed? Looks like maybe.
I sent Sajal a private message to answer it.
Perfect. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that's going to look like in case there's anybody else that's interested in that?
Sure. If you have a battery electric vehicle and you have a WEX gas card account, we can connect your gas card account to your ChargePoint account. It only right now works with ChargePoint so that your drivers can charge at a ChargePoint station. They won't have to take out a personal credit card and pay for it. They would use the key fob from the BEV, from the battery electric vehicle, that is linked to a WEX gas card, and it would consolidate all of your billing. And we're hoping to get additional reporting information in terms of the charging, the cost, how long it's charging, where it's charging, because this is all new territory for us. So we did start reaching out to EEA as the secretariat. They were interested. We wanted to start with their one BEV and then roll it out to DEP. But unfortunately, I met with them the middle of February, and then everything happened with COVID-19, and it kind of like dropped off the radar. But I still keep sending them emails, hoping that things will come around soon. So I hope that helps.
Great, thanks, Cheryl. So we had another question come in. Did OVM do any telematics research within the executive branch to see what agencies were already utilizing their own telematics and what specific needs they might have had? As you are aware, for our district, we utilize very specific spray on, spray off routes telematics for our operations. John, you want to take a crack at that?
Sure, yeah. So this is really more of a contractual question. So there were a few different agencies that had previously installed telematics in some of their vehicles, but that fell outside of the statewide contract. So those were departmental contracts that those agencies were using. So once there was an established statewide contract, it is more of a sort of a contractual operational services division question. But once there is a statewide contract established, all of the executive branch agencies have to sort of follow suit and hop on that new contract for telematics. So in terms of the actual capabilities of what our telematics software is able to do, it is able to do the very specific spray on and off routes. If it's specific to SRB or the mosquito control folks, we are able to tell when the sprayers are on versus when they are off. If it is a law enforcement vehicle, we are able to tell when the sirens are on and off. That if it is a snow plow, for example, we're able to tell if the plow is up or down. So we do have full functionality within the telematics software that we got.
Yeah, so I'll reiterate there that the platform is highly customizable. There shouldn't be an issue customizing the platform to agency specific needs. But if there's specific, I don't know, questions or functionality that's kind of outside of the normal scope of day-to-day business, I mean, we could certainly hop on a call directly with the telematics vendor. We went through a thorough RFQ process to ensure that the needs and wants of agencies from a day-to-day operation standpoint would be met. So if there's something that, again, is outside of the normal scope or what we think is the normal scope of day-to-day business, we could certainly hop on a call with the telematics vendor and have them work it out.
So we have another question here. Can telematics identify or track who the driver is? The answer is no, it cannot. So the only thing that we are able to view is that the actual vehicle is moving and the manner in which it's being operated. We are not able to tell through that technology who specifically is driving the vehicle.
So there's a question. I would like to get a copy of this presentation. Vincent, do we need to begin cleaning all the vehicles now? So I'll answer the presentation portion of it. Absolutely, everyone can get a copy of this presentation. Vin, do you want to take the answer for the cleaning?
Absolutely. So to answer that question, you're welcome to start cleaning your vehicles as your agency sees necessary at this point. I would recommend that your agency looks at some type of schedule for cleaning. The frequency is something that you may determine. For us, we had talked through potentially a monthly or bi-monthly type cleaning with frequent wipe downs in between. But you're welcome to go ahead and use any of the vendors that I mentioned earlier as part of 84A to go ahead and begin sanitizing your fleet. And by all means, if you do start doing that, I'm very interested in your feedback. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to know how it works out for you.
Great, thanks. So we've got a question, no drive camera option with the telematics. It's a great question. And then the follow-up question is looking at it down the road. So to answer the first part of that question, for this first iteration of telematics, we weren't doing a drive camera option. We really wanted to get through the collective bargaining process of just having the device actually in the vehicle and start tracking that data. It is definitely something that the telematics provider on statewide contract VEH 106 does. They do have a camera option. And I would say, yeah, absolutely. I would love to look at it down the road. I think it's a fantastic option and should definitely be something that we look into. So we have, does OVM have approval for telematics use by the union representing staff? So we're currently in the process of going through collective bargaining with a number of different unions through the Office of Employee Relations. We don't have approval yet, so it's a pretty fluid process. I think we had met with 3 different union representatives before COVID-19 happened. And, obviously there's a lot going on right now. We would like to start those conversations up again as soon as possible. But I think that those first round conversations were were certainly positive and productive. These are good questions. Keep them coming. We've got another 13 minutes.
We must have had a shy group today.
Oh, I doubt it.
Maybe even just comments too. Not even a question, a comment.
Yeah, this is what the chat function is for. So we got a question. So any update on what VEH98 update looks like for 2020? In terms of vehicle updates? Yep. Let's see. I don't know. Do we have any contract VEH98 experts on the line? I don't know if Dave Sargent is still on, if he wants to provide some insight into that.
I'm here. Am I allowed to be off mute?
You are good.
Okay. Yeah, good question. You know, things are very fluid right now. I know that's the buzzword of the year with everything going on with COVID-19. We're still marching towards trying to formulate a new contract to take place for December 1st when this current one expires. As time goes on here, obviously things are getting more and more complicated, having to remote and coordinate things remotely. So I think there is definitely a chance that we may have to extend the existing contract, but we are all anxious to get the replacement up and running as soon as possible. And at this point, we haven't officially moved away from the December 1st date, and we're actively having conversations with a consulting firm that we've already engaged to help us with the development of the replacement contracts for both VEH 98 and VEH 93. But things are still very fluid right now. So the short answer is no new update at the time, but actively working through things, and we may need to have a brief extension to the existing contracts to get us through the COVID-19 pandemic. As far as vehicles themselves on VEH 98, we're actively working with existing vendors to supply additional offerings of alternative fuel vehicles in general where available. So that will continue to be ongoing through the existence of this particular contract.
Thanks, Dave. So we got a couple more questions that came in. So any idea when electric F-150s might roll out for purchase? That's a great question. So Ford is coming out with an electric version of their F-150. Karen or Cheryl, do you have any insight in terms of the OEM and any information on production or when they're supposed to come to market? I thought it was going to be at some point in 2021.
So the only information I had when I got the most recent updates was that they were planning on having it for model year 21, but none of the specs have come out yet. And I'm suspecting, and don't quote me on it because I have no actual information, but that may be pushed out just because of all of the shutdowns that have occurred. I know also in model year 22, they were looking to bring out an electric transit van as well, and I don't know if that will stay on track at this point, but we'll keep an eye on those because we do want to have them on contract as soon as they're available.
Yep, so it's in the manufacturer's pipeline, but no guaranteed yet on release dates.
And Alex, this is Eric Friedman. We are currently working with an intern actually on our staff this summer to take a deeper dive into what is coming out in the next, year, 18 months, 2 years that we can be counting on. And so we'll hopefully have some updates on that in the next, month or two to share with folks.
That's great, Eric. Thanks for the update. Another good question here. How are the battery electric grants funded? Does somebody from DEP want to take that one? Going once? Going twice?
Sorry,
I'm Haiti, how are you?
Can you ask the question again? Is it in
Yes,
the,
it is. How are the battery electric grants funded?
oh, so I'm going to assume they're asking about the funding source again. And so for the fleets program, how they're funded, it's been a couple different methods in the past. So if they don't mind, I would like to get back to them. So I don't want to misspeak about what the current funding source is for that $500,000 that was on the slide.
Okay.
And Alex, I just in case the question was actually referring to how the money actually gets transferred or how it actually gets paid out. I'm not sure if that was the question, but there is a seamless process for the money. If the vehicle is being purchased off of VEH 98, the funding can be transferred directly to the vendor and does not have to go through the agency. And I think Haiti and Don, you guys can confirm that, but I believe that that's a process. Same thing for the electric vehicle charging stations. That funding can be transferred directly to vendors who are on VEH 102. And Chelsea, I think you can weigh in on this too, if I got that somewhat correctly or not so much. Yep, you're on mute.
Yep.
Yep,
No,
there
I
you go.
think that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Great. And we have another question about the distribution of the presentation. We'll get it distributed as soon as possible, either today or tomorrow. And this one in particular was in regards to the cleaning process. And again, just to note there, what we're providing is just information that's kind of out there in terms of industry standard best practices, information that we've gathered and gleaned from the CDC as well. And then providers that have been onboarded into the fleet response supplier network over the past, 2 months now. So they've greatly expanded their service network to provide both mobile cleaning and sanitization solutions as well as brick and mortar options. So another question here in regards to telematics. We would like to know who is driving, and will likely continue with logs. Another question came in. And we'll likely continue with logs for that data. It would be helpful if telematics could capture that. So I agree. It would be helpful if telematics could capture that. It is something that telematics can capture. The option, I think, was initially made not to capture that data set because it's we really care about the asset, not necessarily the driver. As wonky as that sounds, it's kind of a controversial topic with the unions, I should say. And again, from our perspective, it was all about really understanding the asset performance and asset utilization. We would definitely still recommend that a very kind of drilled down, boiled down version of the driver log be used to capture at least date in, date out, and individual driver information. So we can still back into that information if we need it. Let's see here. There are retrofit and upfit options to electrify pickup trucks and vans already on VEH 102. That's correct. There is at least XL Hybrid, I believe, is on VEH 102. They're a local company. They can do hybrid and electrification retrofits, upfits. So they are certainly on there. Let's see here. I know I brought this up before. Any progress on a top-down conversion to, say, battery electric vehicles for agencies? A top-down conversion. So does that mean convert all vehicles from internal combustion to battery electric? I don't know. I mean, I'd say that that's kind of the way the automotive industry and fleet industry is moving. We want to work with agencies to really understand application of specific vehicle types and where applicable. Oh, no statewide directive. I think the statewide directives that are out right now, I think the leading by example folks or DEP could probably speak more clearly on this topic than I can, but there are directives around increasing the percentage of alternative fuel and battery electric vehicles in the state fleet. We're currently operating under the fuel efficiency standard, which does have some requirements for battery electric vehicle acquisitions. But I'll turn it over to Eric Friedman so he can provide some additional insight.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I don't want to spend a long time in this conversation other than to say there are some ongoing conversations within the administration about how to speed up and amplify the conversion of our fleet to electrification. And so I would just say to folks, just stay tuned, and we'll be back in touch when we figured out how to set those directives and set those targets that make sense for the fleet.
Yep. And a follow-up question was, or a follow-up comment, Eric, was there's not a lot of support from the end user standpoint right now. So top down is the only way we'll pick up speed.
Yeah, understood. And I think for sure, having some ride and drives and letting people get in these vehicles and trying to answer any questions, I think is an important step to help alleviate some of those concerns. This presentation was, again, meant to kind of jumpstart that effort. We got one part of it in. Hopefully we can down the road get some other parts in for folks to understand really how these vehicles work, and to get some increased comfort levels with the electric vehicle fleet.
Yep, for sure. I mean, as part of the Green Fleet Committee, there's a lot of collaboration that goes on between OSD, DOER, DEP. I think we're all sort of working towards the greater common good in terms of electrifying the fleet and what's best for agencies and the environment.
Yeah. And Alex, I would just add that if folks have comments or suggestions or recommendations on how to work with drivers on sort of a broader scale, and efforts that we should be undertaking to help, again, alleviate some of those concerns, we'd be very open to hearing what those recommendations might be. So I think folks should hopefully.
Yeah, I second that. And this session, the way we had initially envisioned it, was going to include a ride and drive. Right. So I think that's part of the trepidation is really just kind of getting people familiar with these types of vehicles, and then also just guidance around charging infrastructure and just making individuals feel more comfortable with it. But I agree with the individual that logged the comment. I think a top-down approach certainly works best. All right, so we've got some more questions here. Let me see. Do you recommend wearing masks while driving fleet vehicles? I think in accordance with the guidance that's been released from a public health standpoint, I think it makes sense. I think the directive, or the directive has been, wear masks, and certainly wear masks when you can't adhere to social distancing. With vehicles, it's getting a little bit tricky in terms of how we keep employees and drivers safe. I would say, most certainly adhere to the CDC guidelines that are out there that are available. Clean and sanitize vehicles as much as you can. Make sure employees have their PPE. Keeping hand sanitizer and sanitizing wipes in the vehicle and wiping down highly touched items, steering wheels, gear shifters, door handles, seat belts. That's all guidance that has been provided by the CDC. I would also say, in terms of purchasing and ensuring that you have those supplies that you need, there was a communication that was distributed by OSD on Monday in regards to statewide contract use and the vendors available on statewide contract for PPE and supplies. So I would certainly reference you back to that particular communication. All right, so we're currently at 3:01. Happy to stay on for an additional minute or two if there's additional questions. This is all good conversation, so we appreciate the feedback. All right. Well, if we're good for today, I just want to thank everybody again. I think this was a good session. I hope everybody enjoyed it. If you have any feedback in regards to any type of content that you'd like to see in the future, please reach out and let us know. I'm imagining that this is probably the way that we're going to be having these sessions on a quarterly basis for at least the near future. So I would imagine at least the next quarterly outreach meeting will probably be in a web-based format like this. So again, if there's any other topics or content that you'd like us to cover, adding in more poll questions or just more involvement, we'd be happy to certainly incorporate that. And again, thank you to everybody, and please stay safe and be well. All right. Hey, Zelfa, how do I copy my chat?
So just go to your chat, the chat window, and just highlight everything that's there, and it will pull everything because it's not going to come into the general chat.
So anything that came to me for a chat comment?
Anything that came directly to you, yeah. And everybody else should do that if they got any questions directly.
So I addressed any questions that came to me directly.
I know you don't want a copy of the questions.
Yeah, you know what? That's a good idea, actually. Okay. Gotcha.
And Alex, do you want to forward me who asked the question, unless they responded again that they were all set between, if Eric had a.
Yeah, in regards to the funding stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got it.
They mentioned
something you all could review the questions and do formal answers if you want to, or have them for your next meeting as follow-up too.
Yeah, that's good. I think that there's definitely some questions that we want to address proactively, but other stuff I think can be some potential topics.
And then I'll send Karen the chat log of what I have and the recording.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everybody. This was good.
Okay.
Great.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Close it all out now.
Karen, don't end the chat. Don't end the training. You can
Sorry.
leave if you want to, but don't end it for everyone.
I'm still trying to figure out how to copy the private. Do I literally just go in and just copy it?
Just go to the chat box and highlight.
That's what I did. Yep.
Yeah. So all the ones that came to you directly.
Yep.
Which is maybe going to take you a little bit of time because I think you got a few.
Yep. All right. Some good questions.
I'm not sure if it's going to save on your computer, Alex, since you were a participant, because I will automatically get the chat log, but I'm not going to get anything that came to you.
You know what I'm doing, Zelfa? I'm literally just going in and I'm doing a Control-C, Control-V into a Word document, and I'll just
that's fine.
figure it out.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. I thought that went really well.
I agree. Pretty good for the first time.
Yeah, and great questions too. I'm glad that the audience was interactive. They definitely locked some really good questions there.
There was some good participation.
Good stuff. Hey, thanks for your help again, Zelfa. It's greatly appreciated. You were a huge help.
No problem.
Thanks again.
All right.
Thanks for putting this all together, Karen. Appreciate it.
All right. Did you grab everything, Alex?
Yep, I'm good. I'm logging off.
Okay. All right.
All right.
And you're all set?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm just going to end it now, and then I can send. If I don't send it today, I'll send it tomorrow. More than likely, it's tomorrow.
That's fine.
Oh, do you want to end the recording?
I'll be out. What What was that?
End the recording. Although I think it will end automatically.